Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the hidden world of parasites. And let me tell you, these are some of the most successful, most complex, and, well, frankly, terrifying organisms on our planet.
Yeah, just think about that for a second. Some of the world's most successful organisms live inside us. Our bodies, they're basically entire ecosystems for other creatures. And we're not talking about simple freeloaders here. These are absolute masters of survival, with strategies honed over millions and millions of years of evolution.
So, to really get a picture of what we're dealing with, let's visualize some of these intruders. First up, the hookworm. Look at that thing. It has actual hooks it uses to latch on and browse on our mucosal surfaces. Right next to it, that's Trypanosoma. It's a single-celled extracellular parasite, the one that causes sleeping sickness. And see that little boomerang-shaped thing inside the red blood cell? That is the infamous Plasmodium falciparum, the parasite that causes the most deadly form of malaria. Wild, right?
All right, so this begs the question, what actually is a parasite? I mean, what's the official definition? Because it's a lot more than just being a freeloader. It's about a really deep, really fundamental biological dependency.
Okay, so one of the classic definitions comes from a parasitologist named J.D. Smith, and he zeroed in on this idea of metabolic dependence. What does that mean? It means the parasite is completely, utterly dependent on its host, not just for food, but for developmental stimuli, for the signals that tell it when to mature. Take the host away, and its entire life cycle just stops, dead in its tracks.
Now, there's another way to think about this from a researcher named Crofton, who saw it as a numbers game, a game of population dynamics. For a parasite to succeed, it has to reproduce like crazy, way faster than its host. But, and this is a big but, there's a lethal level. They can't kill the host too quickly, otherwise they can't spread. It's this delicate balance, and it leads to this really interesting pattern you see in nature called overdispersion. Basically, most hosts will have just a few parasites, or even none at all. But a small, unlucky group of hosts, they get stuck with a massive burden of them.
Okay, so how do we even begin to organize this incredibly diverse world? Well, parasitologists basically split them into two major families.
You've got your microparasites and your macroparasites. Micro, think tiny, single-celled organisms. Macro, think bigger, multicellular animals, worms and things. But here's what's so cool about this distinction. It completely changes how you study them. With microparasites, which multiply inside you, the host becomes the unit of study. You're either infected or you're not. But with macroparasites, the individual parasite is the unit of study. You might have 1 or 10 or 100 of them. It's a totally different way of looking at the problem.
So let's zoom in on the microparasites. These aren't bacteria or viruses, by the way. We're talking about groups like the Apicomplexa. They're named for something called an apical complex. It's this amazing group of organelles they have at their tip that they use to literally drill their way into our cells. Plasmodium, the malaria parasite, is a classic example. Then you have the kinetoplastia. These guys are characterized by a big old flagellum they use to swim around, like our friend Trypanosoma.
And on the other side, you have the macroparasites. These are the bigger ones, the multicellular animals, often called helminths, which is just a fancy word for worms. You've got your roundworms, like askers, or the super common pinworm, Enterobius vermicularis. Then there are the flatworms, which includes things like tapeworms, with that specialized head called a scolex, and flukes. And believe it or not, it even includes arthropods, like the scabies mite that causes internal infections.
Okay, so what this all comes down to is survival. And these organisms have evolved the most incredible toolkit of strategies to do just that. They have to figure out how to get in, how to survive once they're inside, and then how to get out and find a new host. Let's look at how they do it.
Check out this incredible journey. This is how some parasites get in directly. Take the worm, Strongyloid stercoralis. Its larvae can burrow right through your skin, like, say, the bottom of your foot. From there, they go on this absolutely wild migration through your capillaries, up to your liver and lungs. Then you cough them up and swallow them. Yep, that's how they get into your intestines, where they mature into adults and start the whole cycle over again. It's insane.
But hey, why go through all that trouble when you can just call a cab? A lot of parasites use what we call a vector, basically a taxi service. They let something else do the dirty work of getting them inside us. Mosquitoes, sandflies, kissing bugs, they're all just unwitting chauffeurs for these microscopic hijackers.
And once they're in, this is where the real genius comes out, the art of invisibility. How do they hide from our immune system? Take Leishmania, that unicellular parasite from the sandfly. Its outer surface is resistant to something called complement. That's our body's first line of chemical defense. But here's the crazy part. It actually encourages opsonization. That's a process where our body flags an invader to be eaten by an immune cell. It's basically putting a kick-me sign on its own back. Why? Because it wants to be eaten by a specific cell, a phagocyte. It tricks our own defender into giving it a safe place to live and reproduce. It's hiding in plain sight. Absolutely brilliant.
So, okay, this is all fascinating from a biology perspective, but why does it matter on a massive scale? Well, this brings us to the global burden. We're not just talking about weird biological quirks, we're talking about a global health crisis.
Get a load of this number. Over 2.3 billion people. That's how many were affected by what we call neglected tropical diseases, or NTDs, back in 2017. And a huge chunk of those are parasitic diseases. Why are they neglected? Well, because they overwhelmingly impact the poorest people on the planet.
So how do you even begin to measure that kind of impact? Health experts use a metric called a DALY. That stands for Disability-Adjusted Life Year. It's a way of measuring the total burden of a disease. Think of it like this. One DALY is equal to one lost year of healthy life, whether that's due to dying early or living with a long-term illness or disability.
And when you look at the DALYs from major parasitic diseases, wow, the numbers are just staggering. Malaria is just in a category all its own, causing 65.5 million lost years of healthy life. But look at the others. Cryptosporidium is responsible for over 8 million DALYs, and leishmaniasis over 4 million. These are not small numbers.
Now, it's really easy to think of this as a problem that's happening somewhere else, right? But it's not. Even in developed nations, parasites are a big deal. Take Ireland, for example. It's thought that pretty much 100% of the population gets infected with pinworm, Enterobius vermicularis, at some point, usually as a kid. And we all hear about outbreaks of waterborne bugs like Cryptosporidium and Giardia intestinalis. In the US, there's a whole group of what they call diseases of poverty, which includes toxoplasma, Chagas disease, and trichomoniasis.
But it's not all bad news. There are some truly incredible success stories out there. And one of the biggest is the fight against the guinea worm, a cause famously championed by former President Jimmy Carter.
I mean, just look at this timeline for the guinea worm, Dracunculus medinensis. In 1986, there were 3.5 million human cases. The solution wasn't some fancy vaccine or drug. It was simple cloth filters for water. That's it. By 2023, that number was down to just 14 human cases worldwide. Incredible, right? But here's the plot twist. The parasite is clever. It has now found a new reservoir, in dogs. And that's making the final step of complete eradication a whole lot trickier.
And you know, that story about the dogs, it really drives home the final point. These uninvited guests, these parasites, are anything but static. They are constantly adapting. And as our climate changes, as global travel becomes more and more common, the big question is, where will these parasites, and the vectors that carry them, show up next?